In Acts 9, I was thinking about doing something else, and the Holy Spirit called Danita, told me, you need to get done with Acts. I said, okay. So Acts 9 is a long chapter. There's no way we'll get through it all tonight. We'll just see how far we go. Verse 1, put my eyes on. But Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any belonging to the way, which is what the early Christians were called, followers of the way, or people of the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. So the deal was he was going to bring them to Jerusalem, force them to go before the Sanhedrin, where they would be condemned to either some kind of punishment or a flogging or put in prison. Pretty much by then, I was listening to a thing today, a little documentary on Pontius Pilate. And I don't know who made it. It just popped up, and I said, well, that looks interesting. But they kept making the point that when Pilate gave in to the religious leaders and letting them put Jesus to death, that was the end of his career. That the religious leaders had him in their pocket then and could manipulate him to do whatever they wanted. We do know his career went down after that. He was accused of some criminal things involving money. But what really got him in trouble, he stole money is what he did from the temple to build an aqueduct. And then he had some of the Samaritans who were participating in one of their religious festivals on Mount Gerizim. He thought they were rebelling, so he sent the soldiers in and killed them. They were unarmed. Now, for Rome, you didn't do that. Rome was kind of funny. They didn't mind killing you if you got in their way. But just the normal flow of things, if Pilate, for example, because he had already declared Jesus innocent, by letting him be put to death anyway, actually broke Roman law. They could have pulled him in then. They didn't. But this time they did, because he had these Samaritans murdered. So the Samaritans appealed to the provisional governor in their region, who appealed to the emperor. The emperor recalled Pilate to Rome, and I believe it was Emperor Claudius. It was one of them. But the emperor did not like him. He was kind of considered to be, he kind of grew up in a working class family, so he was kind of considered to be second class anyway, and the emperor didn't like him. And so basically, they didn't even give him a trial. Based on the records we can find, they didn't give him a trial. They just banished him to the end of the Roman Empire, which was Spain. And he ends up in Spain, stripped of all of his military associations, and he's in seclusion. And it's believed, based on what records we have, that he committed suicide while living there. I don't know how I got off on all that, but anyway, that's what the plan was. They were going to take him back to Jerusalem, put them on trial in front of the Sanhedrin, and then they would execute them or put them in prison. All right, so the first thing it says, and this word jumped out at me. It says, but Saul was his Hebrew name, Paul was his Roman name. So as you'll see in a minute, Paul grew up in a Hellenist family who happened to be a very devout family who were a member of the Pharisee sect. But he grew up in a place outside of Israel, so he was a Hellenist. He grew up under Greek influence. And that's one reason why he understood Greek philosophy so well and could use it like when he goes to Athens and he debates philosophy with the philosophers because he was around it growing up. But that word breathing threats. Now, isn't that a strange word? He was breathing threats and murder. Well, I say, you know, anytime a word jumps out at me, I have to look it up and see what it means. The word is only used here in the entire Bible. And it means to inhale. To inhale. And so I read my little description of I knew there was something figurative going on, so I was trying to see what's the figurative language here. And the idea was he was enjoying what he was doing so much it was energizing him. Every time he imprisoned a Christian, every time he killed a Christian, it was like, So that's what the word breathing threats means. It's only used here in the whole Bible. All right, so he was going to Damascus. He had his papers in hand to let the synagogue know what he was there for. And on the road, verse 3, now as he went on his way, he approached Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven shone around him, and falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It's a good principle to remember there. When we're being persecuted for the faith, they're persecuting Jesus. When we're persecuting other people who are people of the faith, we're persecuting Jesus. So it's a good little principle to remember. But anyway, I wanted to give you a little background on Saul. Saul was from Tarsus. Tarsus was the capital of the province of Cilicia. Do you know where that is? Have you ever been there? Okay. All right. I didn't know. You were the most likely to have gone there of anyone here. But it was a coastal town, very prosperous harbor, and it was kind of a unique place. The belief was that that Saul's family had been there for a long time, probably several generations. His family appears to have been a wealthy merchant family. They were Hellenists in background, but they were devout members of the Pharisaical sect of Judaism. Let's see, his Jewish name was Saul. He's going to change it to Paul, which is his Roman name. And why do you think he did that? Yeah, changing names was pretty common. Still is in some places. Some places today, when a person gets saved, they'll change their name because they say, well, the old me's dead. This is going to be the new me. So I think that was part of it. I think another part of it was, who was he going to in his ministry? He was going to the Gentiles, so he was going to have a Gentile name. Let's see. Paul was a Roman citizen. Roman citizenship was something not everyone could get. It was, you either had to buy it or it had to be bequeathed to you. It's believed that it was something he inherited, likely from his father. And the reason why is in Tarsus, as I'll read this to you in a minute. Tarsus was a unique place. It was kind of like a resort town, and the upper class of Roman society liked to go there to vacation. And so, because this town had received, and they didn't demand anything of the Roman government. They had a thing in place where if you were a merchant in Tarsus, you had to give part of your profits back to the community for community enhancement. So they didn't rely on the Roman government to keep things going. Well, because of that, the Romans had given them special privileges. One thing was when the Greeks controlled Tarsus, the Greeks used it the same way, and the town worked basically the same way. They didn't make any demands of the Greek government. And even though they were the capital, they petitioned the Greeks to let them operate independent of Greek governance. And the Greeks did. And so they were like a little independent state surrounded by the Greek Empire. So when the Romans take over, they petitioned the Romans to let us continue this, and the Romans did. And another part of that was the families who were considered to be significant families in Tarsus who had roots there, maybe 3 or 4 generations back, would often be given Roman citizenship as a way of maintaining the favor of the city. So it's believed that's how Paul got it, that his family was a significant family in Tarsus and that they had received Roman citizenship and it had been passed down, because you could pass it down. All right. That's more than you wanted to know. But here's the advantages of Roman citizenship. If you were arrested, you were automatically entitled to a fair trial. If you were not a Roman citizen, you were not. If you were a Roman citizen and you felt you did not get a fair trial, you could petition the emperor to have your case heard there, which Paul does. That's how he ends up in Rome. Okay. Another thing, I didn't put this down, but this is another right of Roman citizenship. You could not be crucified. The reason being, the Romans considered crucifixion to be the most barbaric form of capital punishment they knew. Beheading was over pretty quick. Crucifixion could last for days. Because once you went up on the cross, you stayed there till you died. And sometimes they'd even leave the body up there for several days and let the vultures come and eat it. So the crucifix, the cross, the whole deal concept of the cross, the Romans took from the Assyrians. The Assyrians used it as a way of making a statement to their enemies that if you cross us, this is going to happen to you. And so that's why the death a person has on the cross is due to suffocation. It's not from blood loss. And the way they would position a person on the cross by driving the nails in here is once you started suffocating, you had to pull yourself up to breathe. Well, if you were going to pull yourself up to breathe, what have you got to pull against? Those nails, those spikes that are going to then go up into your wrist. And the spikes that are in your feet, you have to push up. So that means you're going to have to push up against those spikes. So either way, you lose. And that's why most people, after, and someone like Jesus who'd already been beaten, flogged with a cat of nine tails, you were already exhausted, dehydrated, and everything else. And so when they put you on the cross, it was a miracle. He lasted 3 hours. It's a wonder, and that's why sometimes when people had gone through that, they would be so, the rules, if you can call it that, was that when they were flogging somebody, you know, sometimes you'll hear people say, well, they could give them 39 stripes. No, that's Jewish law. Romans give you as many as they wanted. And so they would have a couple of they would usually have 2 soldiers there at the same time doing it. They would both have these whips. The whip's not like we think of long whips, you know, like doing horses with. The whip was only like this long. So they would be right up on you. And then they could do it like they were really good. They knew how to fling it so that those straps would go around and catch you here. And then they'd rip you open. And if they really wanted to mess with you, they'd throw your face open, pull an eyeball out, pull your cheek open, pull teeth out. And these soldiers took great pride in being really good at it. And so they would have 2 there, and they were both doing it at the same time. And then they would have an officer standing there who was supervising it. And when he thought the victim, that's what I'll call it, when they thought the victim had had enough, he would step in and say, stop. And usually the saying he was beaten within an inch of his life came from there. Because he would check to see how deep the lashes were going. Because if they were condemned to crucifixion, he didn't want them to die there. Because if they died there, that could come back on him. So he would stop them, and then they would and when they were being whipped, they were tied up like this from the ceiling. And then and their feet would barely touch the ground. So that's when they would start wailing on them. So it's a wonder that Jesus even made it. Well, he didn't make it up the hill. He had to have help. But it's a wonder he lasted 3 hours on the cross. Well, all that came from the Assyrians. Because the Assyrians believed that and if I had a map, this would make more sense. The Assyrians had enemies on all four sides. So they were in a constant border war. So what they decided was they would use torture as a weapon. And when they would go to war with somebody, they did not distinguish between citizen and soldier. So if they wanted to, they would just go through there and wipe out the whole village. When they were done, when they captured a people, y'all get a lot more history tonight than you thought. When they captured a people, they would mangle them. Some of them, they had a thing where they would pull them apart, tie them to horses, and the horses run in opposite directions. But the one they really liked was crucifixions, because they could make a real statement there by making the people stand there and watch them crucify this person, and they would leave them hanging on the cross as they moved on. So when they go into the northern kingdom, that's why the northern kingdom was so afraid of the Assyrians, because they knew torture was their favorite weapon. So if they caught, say for example, they caught an archer, somebody who was really good at archery, they'd cut their finger off so they could never do it again. If they had a foot soldier, somebody liked to fight with a sword, they would cut their Achilles tendon so they could never stand upright again. When they took the people of the northern kingdom into exile, this back in the day of piercings, they put a ring in their mouth and they ran a cord from the last one through that ring all the way to the wagon or horse, whatever was pulling them, and they had to walk behind that the whole way. And if they started falling behind, that wagon would jerk them through that ring. Y'all grossed out, yeah? Well, that was all in there somewhere. All right. But if you were a Roman citizen, you couldn't be put to that. You were protected from that. If you were a Roman citizen and they mistreated you while you were in jail, you could report them and they would be in trouble for that. That's why Paul pulled that one time when they had beat him and was it Silas or Barnabas? I can't remember who. Beat him and somebody else. And the next day, the soldier came in to check on them, see if they were dead. And Paul said, "Is this the way y'all treat Roman citizens?" And it said fear came over him, and he ran to his superior and said, "We got a problem." And then his superior came to him, apologized, and, "Oh, we're so sorry. We're so sorry. You're free to go." And but that was all because he was a Roman citizen. So having visitors, if you were incarcerated, only Roman citizens could have that. That's why when he was under house arrest, he could have visitors. He could have visitors in his second imprisonment. When he was in the dungeon, he still had visitors. Remember, he asked Timothy to come see him. The reason he didn't have any visitors is they all abandoned him. It wasn't because the Romans wouldn't let them in. They would have let him in, but no one came to see him. So anyhow, now that we'll get off of that. Okay, I did miss one. Roman citizens could serve in government. They could vote in Roman affairs. They could join the Roman legion. In fact, if you join the army, this will thin them out today. If you join the army, it was a 28-year commitment. But when you got out, if you survived that long, you got Roman citizenship. That was your retirement. So, let's see, what else? They could become members of the Senate, and anyone who was a Roman citizen had tremendous advantages in Tarsus. Now, Tarsus was a town of about 250,000, very prosperous town. Like I said, the merchants were required to give their part of their profits back to the city, and that would keep the roads up and take care of keep the schools running, take care of public health and city beautification. Let's see, I'm going to skip some of this. The thing they were known for was a special kind of wool that was cut from black goats that lived in the mountains. And it was called silicium. I think that's right. But that's one of the things that made them a wealthy town. Okay, I already said that about the self-government. Oh, now this would be a good one if you lived in Tarsus. They paid no taxes. They paid no taxes to Rome, including merchants paid no taxes. Tarsus was known as a university city. There were several schools there, and that's probably if Paul grew up in a family of means, he would have been sent to one of these schools as a kid. And that's probably where he was introduced to Greek philosophy, as well as going to the, what's the other schools, local schools for Jews? Synagogue school. Yeah, synagogue school. Okay, I'm going to skip all that. All right. No, it's 25 years of service. I'm sorry, instead of 28. It's 25 years of a 25-year enlistment. All right, verse 5. And he said, this is after he's been blinded, "Who are you, Lord?" And he said, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But rise and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do." The men who were traveling with him stood speechless, hearing the voice, but seeing no one. So Saul rose from the ground, and although his eyes were open, he saw nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And for 3 days he was without sight, and neither ate nor drank. Now there was a disciple at Damascus named Ananias, and the Lord spoke to him in a vision. "Ananias," he said, Here I am, Lord." And the Lord said to him, "Rise and go to the street called Straight." Now, Damascus had 3 main roads running through it. There was one for traffic going that way. There was one for traffic going this way. They were kind of like service roads. And then there was a main road that went through town. And so if the military was coming through or whatever, they would use this main road because it was wider and there was no obstructions. And that was the street called Straight. So this house was located near that street. To the street called Straight, and at the house of Judas, look for a man of Tarsus named Saul. For behold, he is praying. And he has seen in a vision a man named Ananias come in and lay his hands on him so that he might regain his sight. But Ananias answered, "Lord, I've heard about this guy. How would you like to be Ananias?" Whoa, wait a minute now. Well, we're going to have to think about this one, God. Where's my fleeces at? He said, "Lord, I've heard about this man, how much evil he has done to your saints at Jerusalem. And here he has authority over the chief priests to bind all who call on your name." But the Lord said to him, "Go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to carry my name" to who? All right, the order of things here is important. Go to the Gentiles, to kings, to Israel. Okay? So that's the sequence he was to follow. Now we know that once he kind of gets over this and kind of gets on his feet, he's going to start ministering. But what does he do? He flips the order. And he goes to the Jews first, and everywhere he goes, they beat him, abuse him, reject him. He has zero results. And it isn't until he finally, I think it's like 5 or 6 years he does that. And then he finally gets to the point of saying, maybe I better do what God said. And I'm going to go to the Gentiles. And that's when his ministry finally opened up. And it started flourishing. But he said, tell him he's going to go to the Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel. For I will show him, how would you like to have this prophecy? I will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name. Can you think anyone else that God told him that? Hey, I'm calling you, and guess what? You're going to get to suffer. I don't know. I'm just speculating here. I'm putting on my speculation hat. I ought to get one. My speculation hat is, Paul, you've planted a lot of seed. And now you're going to get a harvest. And you're getting back what you dished out. So, and we know he will. So Ananias departed and entered the house, and laying his hands on him, he said, Brother Saul. I wonder if he kind of went, trying to get that out. Brother Saul. The Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road by which you came, has sent me so that you may regain your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit. And immediately something like scales fell from his eyes, and he regained his sight. Then he rose and was baptized. And taking food, he was strengthened. Let's see, I've lost my place here. I've chopped off some of my verses. Hang on a second. Yeah, for some reason I cut off 19 on my. And taking food, he was strengthened. Is the next one for some days? Okay. For some days he was with the disciples at Damascus, and immediately he proclaimed Jesus in the synagogue. Now, where was he supposed to go? To the Gentiles. But no, he didn't like Gentiles. He was a Jew of the Jews. He was of the Pharisee sect. They thought of Gentiles as dogs, less than human. And so he had no use for it, so he thought he could improve on God's commission. And he would go where he wanted to. And immediately he proclaimed Jesus in the synagogue, saying, He is the Son of God. And all who heard him were amazed and said, Is not this the man who made havoc in Jerusalem of those who called upon his name? And has he not come here for this purpose, to bring them bound before the chief priests? But Saul increased all the more in strength and confounded the Jews who lived in Damascus by proving that Jesus was the Christ. Now, well, we'll look at 23. 23, with many days had passed, the Jews received the gospel and were all baptized. Now, the Jews plotted to kill him. But their plot became known to Saul. They were watching the gates of the city, watching the gates day and night in order to kill him. But his disciples took him by night and let him down through an opening in the wall, lowering him in a basket. So we'll stop there for tonight. So Saul is starting out, a little bumpy start. He's like our old truck we've been talking about. He's trying to get it jumped off. It doesn't help that he's disobeying here. And, we've talked about partial obedience is still disobedience. And so he's partially obeying. Preaching, it's the disobedience part is he's preaching to the wrong people. And it doesn't work out. And so he has his first taste of persecution as he finds out they are plotting to kill him. And so he escapes by being lowered over the wall in a basket. Now he's going to go, we'll look at this probably next time. He's going to Jerusalem because the Holy Spirit said, I got to get through this. He's going to go to Jerusalem. And the fun part about that is when he gets to Jerusalem, he tries to join with the apostles and wants a leadership role. And they look at him like he's from Mars. And so old Paul, he's still got some learning to do. He's going to get his feathers plucked pretty well. And eventually he's going back home to Tarsus for a few years. And we'll get to that later. But for tonight, I think it's, like I said, I think it's interesting that he got started very zealous for God, but for the wrong reason. And you know, there's so many people out there tonight who are zealous for God, but for the wrong reason. And they're just slaughtering people left and right, and they think they're doing the Lord's work. You know, when you hear about all these preachers who are falling and quitting and everything else, and as sad as all that is, and especially in those where illegal things have been going on, justice needs to take place. But it's amazing how many Christians are real zealous in defense of God and condemning anybody who's in any way associated with these people. And they'll just throw in there for good measure people who are not of the same denomination they are, because they're going to hell too. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard some of these guys say, well, you know, they preach that prosperity gospel. Okay, there's a lot of that prosperity gospel that isn't true. But it is also true, there's some of it that is. And I would much rather preach that than the poverty gospel that a lot of them preach. That, you know, you're just poor as can be, and that's just God's cross for you, you know, to be poor. If God wanted you rich, he'd pour money out in your house. Well, no. It could be God doesn't want you rich because he knows you can't handle it. Or it could be that he wanted to bless somebody and showed them what to do, and they said, no, God, if you want me to be rich, you'll drop it in my living room. And now they're poor. So that gospel is just as bad as the false parts of the prosperity gospel. All righty. Well, any questions or anything before we go?
Until we hear that and can really embrace that truth, I know I've thought these things before, but as I heard you describe it, I thought, Jesus, you're God, how we dishonor you for what you did for us by not accepting what we got because you suffered that for us. So I appreciate that.
Well, and typically when someone went through that, when they were done, their back would be filleted, and you could see the organs. And, you know, when it says that he was unrecognizable, that's because they had wrapped it around his face and pulled it across. And, yeah. So that was, could you imagine having to carry a cross on your back when it's ripped open? Yes, sir.
The Lord Jesus actually said, no one takes my life. I have the authority to lay it down and power to pick it back up. And then in Colossians it says, he spoiled principalities and powers, making a show of them, openly triumphing over them in his cross. They crushed the life out of him, and it didn't leave until he determined to give it up. That was his triumph. They realized they had not been able to take it, that he freely gave it.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts? All right, well, Brother Sammy, you got anything else to share with us? I was going to ask you before. Well, how about praying for us?